Ever wonder what makes really creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how new ideas come to life and become paintings, sculptures, plays, or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community and explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. For today's episode, I'm going to take you a little deeper into the land of enchantment, to Gallup, New Mexico, the gateway to the Navajo Nation. To get there, I drove southwest, across breathtaking landscapes, which when depicted in paintings seem like they must be fantasy, but here they were whizzing by me. I passed magnificent red sandstone cliffs, home to Anasazi archaeological sites dating to 300 AD. A slow-moving freight train with brightly colored cars parallels the legendary Route 66. Back in the day, it would have been more than a full day's journey to get to these Navajo lands from Santa Fe. Today, it took about 3 hours each way. Well worth the trek to meet a young artist with a bright future. All right, so here we are finally. This has been a long time coming, right? I mean, we've been trading communications back and forth since I first met your father in Santa Fe. So the backstory here, I was at Indian Market and doing the contemporary sort of leg, with all of the things. And I guess you'd gone off to lunch or something, but I got to you were on the very end on the left, and I turned around and stopped dead in my tracks. Your work stopped me dead in my tracks. Then I started talking to your dad, who you were sharing a booth with him, and your dad is a very well-known jeweler. We got to chatting, and it was then that I knew that I just absolutely had to meet you. And what I was reflecting on the way here is, so I drove to Gallup to be here and to see your studio. And I realized that you're one of the first people that I've spoken to on my podcast series where I met your work before I met you. Here's the great story that I wanted to tell you. I was invited to a friend of mine's house for dinner, and I walked into his house. It's the first time I'd been at his house.
Perry.
It was Perry's house. And I walked in and I went, "Oh my God, that's Hiro." And he's like, wait, how do you know Hiro? And so I told him the whole story. So that's the small world that goes there. So he told you.
Yeah, let's see. I first met him at Santa Fe Indian Market, and he loved that painting that's in his home. And he stopped in his tracks. He came in. Another person was there as well, and they were interested in the same painting. And he's a person that's like, he doesn't regret not buying stuff. So that's what he told me. But something about that particular painting attracted him. And he was there, and he stayed there for a while. And then he was wondering if he had room in his home. And then he went home to go measure, and he said, "I'll take the painting." And he's such a nice person. We dropped the painting off with him later that night, and he has such a beautiful home, and I was really glad that painting went home.
And it's in good company. Yeah. He's got a lot of important pieces there. So then
I met him just recently at the Heard Museum, and he mentioned you and said that you're great friends, and that you came over for dinner one night, and that you saw my painting there, and we were just like, "This is Hiro's painting." And I was really happy with that you got to see one of my paintings in person before even coming here to the studio. And yeah, it was a cool experience.
Well, it's worth noting, I think, that, you're a young emerging artist. I mean, and for your work to be so recognizable that I could spot it from across the room after having just seen a small collection of your work, at Indian Market speaks, to your recognizable style, which for a young artist is really impressive.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. And, I'm not sure how to still feel about, with me being so young. it's still surreal to me that my work can do that, and that I've created such a distinct style based off of the influences of my favorite artists that I
So say more about who is your favorite artist. I'm going to say,
when I first started painting, I didn't really know a lot of any contemporary artists, and there was only one that I knew of, and his name is Wes Ling, and he is a contemporary painter as well, who does like the Basquiat type of paintings. And so I fell in love with his work first, and then when I first started painting, it was, I didn't know who Basquiat was, which is a surprise, and that was just, or I first started painting, and it was more of like not stick figures, but it was like characters, something like these. Those are earlier drawings, and I started doing those first, and then that's when my dad was, he said, your work reminds me of Basquiat, and so I looked him up, and that opened like a whole world for me and influence for me, and that was just like, whoa, like, he was the first artist to do this style in a way of being recognized and creating just something. And to me, I've always wanted to just create these types of creatures and figures, because to me they're alive in the paintings, and that they're living their own life wherever they may be in these paintings. And once I'm done painting with it, they go off on their own with.
So like you give birth to these little creatures.
Yeah.
And they, so how do they come to you? Do you have conversations with them, or?
Yeah, usually it's one of my main influences is music, and that's just another huge influence on me. With the paintings, the music ranges from like classical, jazz, and then it goes into the punk rock music and metal and classic rock, and that's where I'm really getting that like energy. So when I'm here painting, I put on my music through a speaker, and whatever that energy is giving from the music, it just goes through me, and then it goes through the canvas. But I always try not to be perfect. I try to draw like a child, because in a way, we all have a child's mind and want to still be a child in some days. And so in a way, I can be just myself and have the child mind and free forms of just working and everything.
Well, I think it's attributed to Picasso, who says that it's keeping that beginner's mind that's the hardest thing to do as an artist. And
yeah,
that's totally paraphrased. So how is it working for you to be at IAIA? You're at school there, right?
Yeah. I am in my third year, so I'll be finishing up in like next year. I'll be in my senior year, and with that, I met so many great artists and students, and they're just very cool. And
do you feel like you're able to stay your kid self?
Yeah, definitely.
I think IAIA has a really interesting and different kind of art program.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, because with the classes I've taken in the past semesters, they've always been very supportive of their students' works and very supportive of my work as well. And that's just, that really helps a lot, because I know there's some art schools that are very like, you do your own style, but they want you to focus with whatever is assigned with, like whatever their assignment is. But with IIA, they let you be yourself. And
so, like, give me an example of a kind of assignment that you might get.
Yeah. So last semester, I had a really cool teacher. His name is Daniel McCoy Jr., and he's a painter, and he was our instructor and for a 2D fundamental drawing class, and a lot of the assignments he gave were just to do like black and gray shading, and then to do a little bit of painting. But he would always encourage us to paint whatever we want to do. You don't have to follow imagery or follow a construct, a structure. So with that, that really helped me to paint what I wanted to paint without being maybe judged or being like, maybe you should change this or change that to this. And so that really helped me with to keep going. And he was really supportive with my work, and he tells me to go big with my art, because most of the assignments were like maybe 16 by 20 inches of canvas or paper. But once he's seen my work, he was like, you have to go bigger with it. He said, you can do small, but the main thing is to go big with it.
Yeah. And so what's it like to have other students in the class with you? Do you find yourself influenced by their style, or are you so clear on your voice? I mean, it seems to me like your voice is really clear.
Yeah. I mean, I'm inspired by everything in life. That's where a lot of these influences with the imagery in my work comes from, is just things in life that has happened and also things that's happening. And when I saw other students' work, it was like, wow, everyone's talented in their own way. And it's like, some of it's really fine art, and then most of the work were fine arts, were instead of like scribbles and stuff. But that really inspired me as well. And yeah, I'm not sure. It's weird. It's when you're with other students working in the same space, it's like there's a lot of energy going on there, and everyone's creative energy is like mixing together. And sometimes it can throw off another person. Sometimes it throws off me when I'm working, because it's like most of the time I work alone, and I do that. But when it's with other people, I think there's just a whole nother dimension that's being created. And
well, that's a really unique experience that you're getting, to be literally creating among other creatives who are tapping into that field too, because so many of the artists that I've been talking to, who are probably either mid-career artists or wherever they are in their trajectory, they're definitely past school age, and they're relegated to their studio or wherever they choose to do their work. Yeah. So that interaction of bumping off of other people's energy who are also engaged in it is like, it's a pretty unique experience to art school, I would think.
Yeah, it is. And unless
you're on a residency program or something like that. Yeah.
And art school, I knew I wanted to go to art school just because I was really encouraged to. But at the same time, I just want to do myself and do me with my art. But art school has helped a lot, especially with discovering and learning history on like the Renaissance art. And that's what I'm learning right now, is taking a course on European art. And with that, it's so different from what's today, because that, it was like a new style in the 1500s and way back then. And then it started evolving through these different artists, and it all came through generations. And so when I learned last semester, I learned about like the art between 1930s to maybe 90s, around there. And that's when I finally figured out that the art was more, I guess the style I do is neo-expressionism. It fits more into that category. But then again, I don't really want to fit into a category, but in the art world, it has to.
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I suppose it does. But what I'm thinking of as you're speaking is that certainly in the Renaissance, one of the things that was very present was an apprenticeship program where you were learning from teachers, and there were very specific conventions that were taught and passed down and passed down and passed down. And because of contemporary art doesn't follow that lineage, you're not in the studio studying with a master before you get to try your own hand at it. Yeah. So you had these lineages of artists. So as native painters, you guys have this direct line to your ancestors that's coming. And so there's this kind of really interesting parallel between the Renaissance artists and you. So do you feel like you've got the ancestors coming through?
Yeah, I definitely. Because, through my life as a kid, my dad's been collecting Native American art, and a lot of it has cultural influences in them, and it's definitely a Native American style. And so I grew up around that, and but at the time I did not know that we were getting these pieces who were maybe like thousands of dollars, and that these artists were famous and they were known for their imagery. And so in a way it does flow through me, and I do feel the energy that it does. And I come from a line of I don't come from a line of artists, because my dad's the first artist, I guess, in our family. But through that, he learned the hard way of becoming a self-employed and artist, making that his main job. And so,
well, you grew up seeing him do that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just, I don't know, it's definitely a weird experience still with that, and I'm not sure how to explain it.
He's in a different medium, so definitely. You've distinguished yourself, from that. So you're, in a way, you're following in his footstep as an artist, but in a completely different medium, and certainly, do you feel like do you recognize an influence of your father's style in jewelry to your painting? I'm noticing this ring that keeps flashing by me. It's hard not to notice. Is that one of his pieces, or is that your piece?
This one is Cody Sanderson.
Oh, Cody Sanderson,
My dad got this for my birthday last year.
Very cool.
And, he's friends with him, but everyone has their own style, especially my dad's. He definitely does traditional jewelry work, Navajo jewelry work, but also he ties in with a little bit of contemporary work, like the spider. That's very, different from a traditional bolo necklace. And
we were looking upstairs right before we started talking. That this amazing collection that you've been living with, this art. It can't not influence you. And one of the pieces is the piece that your dad made for the Heard Museum, and that's with the spider on it.
Yeah, and at his his studio, he has a lot of books on different silversmith artists, and I used to look through the books of those, and I can see the influence that my dad has as well through those, and it's like wow. But also, the way his creativity is, it's so much different from the painting. It's I don't know. It's like I can't tap into that type of influence or creativity with jewelry. I tried at one point, maybe when I was like 8. I was very inspired with what he was doing, and I was like, I want to make something like that. And that was, but I just did a sketch, but then I never got to do the jewelry working.
Well, I noticed as we walked in, there was a wire sculpture that you've done. Yeah. So have you worked with sculpture at all?
No, that was my first sculpture that I've worked with. And, when I first started that class, I was kind of lost at first because, I just draw and paint, and that's what I'm very inspired by. But now I've been inspired with sculptures and all types of different sculptures that influence me. And that one was based off a drawing that I did, and I knew I wanted to create like a head, but in my style, as if it was in a painting. And it came out the way I wanted it to. And now with so now I want to get more into the sculpture because it seems fun. That's what the effect I has done on me, was taking these different courses of different mediums, is to try to expand my medium more out. And with sculpture, that really captured another part of me. And I still want to work on it. I still want to do more with the wire sculpturing and kind of just go out of the boundaries with it, not, maybe put clay or something around it or duct tape with. The duct tape, I was really inspired with an artist. His name is Banks Violet, and he's, I'm not sure, he's like a minimalist artist, but his work is like so unique, and it's like awesome because it's inspired from music influences as well, mainly metal and the punk music.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because you were talking about going from 3 dimensions with the sculpture from 2 dimensions of the painting, but how many dimensions are in music?
Yeah, I mean...
So to me, it seems like, there's lots of room, right? Lots of space to explore.
There's definitely is. With music, it's like you can add so many layers to it, and, it doesn't have to just be a drum or bass or guitar. It's... there's so many, thousands of musical instruments we have now today, and those influence me singing with my music and the way I play. And it's the way I look at my art too, is being experimental is what I really try to aim for. And same with the paintings, I try to be experimental. One painting I put I had raw canvas sitting around, and I screen printed a graphic over it, and I collaged the raw canvas onto the painting. And it was very different. It still is different. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure some people have done that, but it was different for me to try that. And a lot of people were surprised with it because they never seen a painting with raw canvas collaged onto another canvas. And collaging I've been really into now, especially with painting. I try to collage original drawings into my paintings as well. And I guess another topic to get on is my first introduction into art was fashion. That was, it's surprising for a lot of people because I do painting now, but fashion was the first, art medium or art that I wanted to do. That was influences from my older brothers. They were, the older brothers always have the biggest, coolest things in life, and they know who's coming up and the coolest bands and stuff. And so with my brothers, it was through that, with their music that they were listening to, I was like, this is cool. And then I saw that, or I looked up the artists, and then I found out that a lot of them, or some of them, had clothing brands. And for one was a clothing brand called Golf Wang by a rapper named Tyler the Creator. And so in mid school, in 7th grade, was where I really wanted to do clothing and screen printing. So I was inspired with that, and then I kind of just went off on my own through mid school until high school was when I wanted to do screen printing. But at the time, I didn't know how to do screen printing, or didn't know the dynamics of it. So I would just draw, and then I would just buy blank hoodies or t-shirts and draw my logo or art on them. And I would sell them to my friends, and they would buy them. And some of them still have it to this day. And I made, I guess that was my first art was drawing on t-shirts and hoodies. After high school, that's when I first experimented with trying to screen print, just me, doing it myself. And it was a lot of trial and error through that, because the first time I tried it, I didn't really, the emulsion or the burning of the design onto the screen and washing it out. And, it's such a complex thing, but once you get the hang of it, you can do it like that, like painting for me. And so I did that. I sold those, and I'm coming up with new designs now to still go on with selling hoodies and clothing. But that was my first intro to art was screen printing and digital art.
So you think you'd take some of these, because now they've got these all kinds of capacities to take artwork and just reproduce it into clothing.
Yeah, that's what I want to do with some of the artwork and the imagery. I've done some of it with hoodies and based off of my drawings, and a lot of people love it. It's cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what have you got? Oh, she found a leg of a chair. I'm noticing a ton of books. So you said you loved having books around you. Is that something that you discovered was inspiration for you after you developed your own style? You got curious about other people's styles, or how did the books start to come into the scheme of things?
I've always loved books. They were, I mainly just looked at the images through books, because as a kid, I never really read, and the only time I would read was just if it was a sign through school. But my dad is the one who always said that reading will take you places, reading will make you successful. That's stuck with me since high school. When I first started painting, I didn't have any books to start with, but we have a bookshelf upstairs, and it's just a whole line of books, of different, all kinds of books. With influences, a lot of it is art books that I have, and it's way better than looking on your phone, even though Google has everything, but I feel like having the physical copy is so much, it's better, and it makes you feel better as well, especially as an artist, to have such cool books as well. And I've always wanted to collect books. I've always liked the look of books laying around as well. Makes your studio look more alive.
We were talking earlier about the medieval guild system and the way they used to teach the artists. Have you ever attempted to paint in the style of somebody else?
The first time when I first started painting, I was inspired with he owns a clothing brand, and he posted a painting one time that he did, and it was just a collage of images together. And one thing that stuck out to me was kind of like an abstract skull, and so that I wanted to do something in that sense. And I was maybe my junior year of high school. I tried, and I didn't do well because I kind of doubted myself with it, and I just gave up on it. And after that, I was still trying to find myself in a sense of what I want to do as well. But then I wasn't worrying about it too much, and I was I want to try painting again. And I kind of just drew this figure of a neck and a face, and he had spiked hair. And it was just he was one of my first characters and figures that I introduced into my art. And with that, I really loved the way he came out and loved the way he looked. And I was inspired with a checkered type of colors. And so I did a red and blue color in the background, and then layered this person over with it. And I put a cigarette in his mouth, because I don't know, something about the aesthetic of smoking, especially in paintings, it's it comes out at you, and I like how they look in paintings as well, even though it's not good for you, but in the paintings, they're good for them. But that was the first style that I tried doing, but didn't succeed at first. But later on in the years, I came back to it and found out that it was for me, even though I may have failed in the first time.
Well, so say a little bit more about that self-doubt, because I think anybody who's danced with the creative has had that experience. So how did you know that it was doubt, and how did you know that you would overcome it?
I think the first time, that first time that I sat with doubt was I couldn't do it, and I was I can't paint like that. I think it was...
You mean, when you say you couldn't do it, you mean the rendering that you had created didn't match your idea of what it was supposed to be in your head?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really... So I think so many artists, especially people who are trying to render.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think that's what taught me to just be free with it all. you don't have to be so distinct. Depends on what style, but you don't have to be so distinct with the art you want to create. You know, it has to be free form, and you have to kind of just let your mind and let your body go, and like in a way you have to turn off the back of your head or something to turn off your mind and to just go with the flow actually, and trust the process. And that time I think I was trying too hard to render someone else's style and not finding my own, and that's what I think put the doubtness in me, and I was like, okay, I'm not.
It was sort of like a kind of comparison.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm just teasing this out because I think that anybody who sits down and tries to do something for the first time usually has an idea in their head of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's usually based on something that somebody else has done, because we don't necessarily, I mean, it's a rare bird, I think, that knows what they want to create inside their own head and then like just goes for it. I mean, I do know a few people who've had that lucky opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And that was, it was just an experience that I had to go through, because through that I had to find myself, and I eventually did with what I'm doing.
Well, what's remarkable about that, and I hope this doesn't sound patronizing, but to find yourself at the ripe young age of whatever you are, and I don't know how old you are, but I mean, it's a great gift. And did you find it in music as readily? Yeah,
music, I grew up listening to from punk to classic rock to country, old country, and, with my dad, his music was that. And it wasn't until high school was when I really started falling in love with the punk music, and my first introduction was like the Ramones, and that had such a influence on me because their music made me feel somehow, and I wanted to kind of rebel, and that's what the point of the punk music was, is to rebel against, and that's what it made me feel. And so through that I started discovering more artists and more bands, older bands, and they're bands that I still listen to today, and I think they'll be with me forever, and that has such a huge influence with how I work and how I found myself as a person. I'm 21 years old, and that, a lot of people are very surprised with me knowing these bands that no one else knows. And
well, I mean, I had to kind of do some math when you were saying that, because of course the Ramones are, it's like I was probably your age or older when they were around, and so it's like, sure, the Ramones, and then I have to realize that was 40, 50, 40 years ago, right? So that's pretty wild. But in terms of the music, I think especially in our era, people have way more access to music growing up than they do fine art or painting. Do you play other people's music, or do you write your own music? Or
I play other people's music. That's let's see. I'm inspired with John Cruikshank from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They're one of my favorite bands, and with his playing style, it varies from Jimi Hendrix and all these other artists that play in like these blues scales, and John Cruikshank and Jimi Hendrix have a big influence on me with my guitar playing, just because it gives me, I guess I can be complex with it, and I can teach myself these chords, and it's like I'm not sure what it's like. Now it's kind of easy for me to play because I've been playing for maybe 4 years, and I can play them like easier than when I first started playing.
Well, I keep coming back to this sort of correlation between painting and playing music. And, in painting, you sort of carved your own path and your own style, so it's definitely your music, so to speak. But with music, you're comfortable kind of riffing off of somebody else's style. And it's interesting that something about music, lends itself to people taking somebody else's music and playing with it.
Yeah.
And I don't see that we do that in art. In painting, I think the expectation is that you find your own unique style. But there's something about music that's interesting in that you can play the same song over and over again and have a completely new experience of it each time.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are at and like where you play. I love playing here just because it's my safe place or sanctuary and it's my own private area. And I try to write my own music. I do want to start a band, and like my friends, me and him, want to just play music. It's okay if we don't get big or anything, but it's a passion of ours to just play because music holds such a unique energy and how it can attach on to someone's soul and stay with them forever. I guess that's what art does. It attaches onto yourself, and you can't let it. Even though you may push it away, it'll come back.
It keeps coming back to you. Yeah. So, between music and painting, do you just sort of bounce back and forth, or do you have a particular ritual that you use where you spend a certain amount of time with your music and a certain amount of time with painting?
Yeah, usually, when I come down into the studio, I start on a painting or start finishing a painting, and, I'll have my music playing, and then if there's like a specific song that comes on, or a certain song, I'm like, I want to try to learn it by ear, listen to it, and then figure out the chords through it. So I'll take a break from, if I'm having not creative block, but I need to step away from this for a while, then I'll come over here and try to learn whatever song is playing, and that helps me because it's it's like a therapy, you're with yourself and you're with your own thoughts, and you can just be yourself and try to learn it with the mistakes and everything, and not have anyone hear your progress. And
so have you ever had the experience where you're playing and you're sort of you've shifted mind states and suddenly it informs what needs to happen next on a painting?
Yeah, it definitely does. When I'll sit here and then I'll be playing, and then I'll be playing a really fast and heavy punk riff, and then I let go and I go back to the painting and add in whatever I want to add in through the energy that I'm getting through the guitar and music, and it just goes on to the canvas. And
so it just sort of goes back and forth.
Yeah, it goes back and forth. But sometimes I'll just stay at the canvas and just sit there and paint, and I'm not sure when a painting's finished as well. It's so weird because most of the paintings, I guess it speaks to me, and it's not telling me when it's done, but I have to know when it is, and I think when it's done, I have to step away and kind of gather my thoughts and feelings and look at it, and then okay, it's done.
Well, it's interesting. Once again, music has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's a kind of a form that a piece of music will take.
Yeah.
And it definitely has a conclusion. So I think it's easier to know when a song is done.
Yeah.
But it's harder to know when a painting is done.
Yeah. That's there's an interview with the drummer from Metallica, and he owned one of Basquiat's paintings, and I think they asked him, when do you know a song is done? And he, referred to Basquiat's painting behind him, and he said there was, I forget what the painting was, but in the top left corner, it's just, a black spot, and with little markings from the end of the brush, and he was what did he say? He was why isn't there more stuff right there, or why is it just left like that? And he was I'm not sure when a song is done, or if it's done. It's when is the painting done? And that always sticks with me as well, and it's when is a painting done? But yeah.
So when you look at, say, the piece, we're looking at a very striking piece that is a skeleton with a headdress, sort of. I guess that's how you describe it.
Yeah.
Do you hear pieces of music that you were listening to as you were working on that?
Yeah, when I look at this painting, I was listening to a lot of jazz music. So when I look at it, that's what bounces off at me is I can hear the trumpets and the drums and the piano playing, and it's like jazz music is such a complex type of music, and it can pick up pace real quick, and I was doing that. Once I started picking up the pace, that's when I was like just going back and forth to the paint palette, and then going back to the canvas and just laying down layers. And then I took a step back and then saw that the bottom part was the one thing that I was only missing, and I just went with it, and then I went with little parts of different colors of paint, and that's when I finished the last stroke, and I came back and it looked done to me.
Well, that's really cool. So there's a phenomenon called synesthesia. Have you heard of that? That's when people hear colors. It's where the musical part of the brain and the visual part of the brain kind of like cross over.
That's one thing I never really experienced with was hearing colors. Only sometimes, depends on what the music is playing through my playlist. With the red, I really love working with red because it's such a bold and striking color that sticks out so much. But also it can tell so much with what else goes on to the painting. Like this painting, for example, I was really listening to like the Misfits and the Germs, and so when I look at the red, I can hear the punk influence and punk music that came through as well. And it's like I don't know, it's like a room. I was very inspired with Francis Bacon's work, and that's another one of my favorite artists. His work is, even though it's dark, but it tells so much in a sense of what's going on. And I created this I really love this like mouth type of figure, and that was influenced with an anatomy book that I have, and I've always been fascinated with anatomy. That's one thing. Like if I wasn't an artist, I would have gone into like the medical field of being a surgeon or something. Just because my dad was wanted us to be a doctor or something, but with that, I've always been fascinated with like the human body and the anatomy of it, like the ribs and the skeletons, and it's just, I don't know, it's like that's our structure that's what makes us up as humans, is this whole different organs and so many weird names for them, and that's where I get these like skeleton faces or like other stuff, and yeah, that comes from another type of energy that's really weird.
Well, I think it's fascinating because again, that like those are primal archetypal forms, right?
Yeah, they are.
You're kind of playing with them.
Yeah, and that was another thing that from the Renaissance era of art was they were making these anatomies of the body.
I can't remember where it was in the scheme of things, because for a long time the church, to desecrate a body to look at the anatomy was a big no-no, right? Yeah. But I think that there were artists, and I think Leonardo was one of them, who, there were these groups of artists working covertly to dissect bodies and understand anatomy. So that's beginning of that, and alchemical process and all kinds of mysteries.
Yeah, and with that, with the understanding the anatomy of the body, when I put skulls into my work, or like the anatomy of the skeleton, it's not coming off as a morbid, or it's not coming off as a negative type of imagery. It's I paint it with beauty, I paint it with positive energy, and I paint it knowing that it's a part of us, and that's what holds up our structure. We have to take care of it, and it'll take care of us. And so that's the way I see the skeletons and stuff. You know, it's there when we're born, and then when it's the end of our life cycle, it's going to be there. And that's where, and I think that's where a lot of people see it as dark, just because, you know, at the end of the life cycle, it's just your skeleton. But to me, it's part of our life still. It's us, and so when I do paint skeletons, it's always with a positive and beauty painted with that.
So how do you think that, because one of the things that IAIA is organized around is the notion of the indigenous Native American, contribution, and my understanding is that there is an emphasis on stories and storytelling and knowing what the stories are. So do you feel like you've been given greater access to your lineage? I mean, we're talking about continuity, like what came before you and what comes after you, and the skeletons being kind of a good symbol for that in a way.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily always used in that context, but how do you feel like that connects? How do you feel connected to the artists that have come before you in the tradition of indigenous art, and what are you leaving in your wake? You still have a long way to go, obviously.
Yeah. I'm not sure, you know,
it may not even be contextualized like that for you, but it's still, again, you're sort of young looking forward at so much, and maybe that's a question that's sort of better suited to somebody who's had a lot of life to look back on.
Yeah. You know, with the art after school, I want to just do more shows. I want to get more out there, but also I just want to keep creating and keep going with it, because, you know, time's not promised as well, and I want to make just so much that I can and leave that much impact on my culture and my people as well. And I grew up mainly traditional through my practice of being a Navajo. And with that, it's all...
And say a little bit for people who don't know. Say a little bit more about what that might mean for you.
Yeah, you know, I didn't grow up religious or Christianity, even though I went to a Christian school, but my family, their generations always practice traditional and cultural beliefs, and we still practice it today, even though a majority of it is gone from the effects of the U.S. government and the genocide of Native Americans. And so, you know, when I look at religious stuff, it's I respect it still. You know, if someone believes in it, that's totally fine, but it's just not something for me, or I try not to think about it too much, just because this is my life that I'm trying to just create as much as I can. And the school is very they're very supportive, and they're cultural, and they let a lot of their students, you know, a lot of their students are from different tribes all over the world, and they let them practice their own way, and they don't try to give them into one thing. And that's what they teach in their history classes, as well as the like sovereignty and the history of Native American people. And a lot of, you know, kids or students there don't know about it as well, just because a lot of the school systems never really taught that part of history. And,
well, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Christian school that I went to, they even though before they were a mission school for Native American children, but they changed and they incorporate it with their history classes, which is good, because they're in a...
And were they specifically teaching the Navajo traditions, or because where you went to school here, I'm presuming, right here in Gallup.
Yeah, they taught to all the students, and not just specifically Navajo people. But it was... So
what cross section of students would you have had in your class growing up? Just out of curiosity.
The majority was Navajos, and it was like half Navajo and half white people that were in the school. And, luckily the students and everyone that went to Rehoboth understood us as people and everything. All of my siblings except one all went to the same school, and they were taught the same thing, and it does have an effect on them, just because the school name's Rehoboth, and they did start out as like a boarding school for Native children, but I think later on they put out.
They reintegrated the native traditional.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's really important because as I grew up on the East Coast, and as far as we were taught or knew, almost that the Native Americans no longer existed, and so that seems like a gross overstatement, except that it really isn't. Yeah. As far as we were taught, and the integration was complete, and yes, there were reservations, but it was like this other concept.
Growing up, I never really knew that I was Navajo, because I never really thought about it, and I never thought about the history or anything, just because I was really young, and I just was a kid, and I would just make friends and be with them and do my own thing. And then it was like mid high school, and I was like really understanding that there's not a lot of representations of Native Americans in media or TV or anything, until now, that we have a lot of Native American celebrities who are like being recognized, and it's cool seeing that, because as a kid you rarely saw that. It was more Native Americans seen as people who weren't here anymore, or like there's such a small group of them. But once you realize and look deeper, it's totally the opposite. Even we're very spread out now. There's so many. I never realized that there were so many different tribes, and until I got to like IAA, it was like, well, there's like so many tribes.
And I just want to say this, and I hope nobody jumps down my throat about it, but like, if you didn't know, how are those, we all went through the same school system, so how are we as white people to know either? And yes, it's time for that to get corrected. And again, I think it's really important that there is focus being made to kind of just get all the stories, because this story's out there. Yeah. And all the richness of the culture, and
definitely.
And that you can own being a part of a great tradition that has so much to offer.
Yeah.
So do you identify, and I feel like I'm putting a lot of words out here, but do you identify as Native, Indigenous? Do you identify as Navajo? How do you because you're still a young person kind of deciding how you're going to present yourself to the world. Is it important to you that you just are received as an artist for your art, or is there an element of wanting to own your tradition, or how do you feel about that?
Let's see. How I feel, I know I'm Indigenous, and I identify as Indigenous and Navajo. But as artist, when I first started painting and doing art, I didn't want to be in the category of traditional Native American art, because, when a Native artist does do art, it's usually very traditional, and the imagery is like cultural, and it's from generations of like those types of art, and like textiles and everything, and those I would see as Native American art, just because it fits into how the imagery and style comes out and designs. But when I first wanted to be more than just a Native artist. I want to be seen as a contemporary artist more than just a Native American artist. And I've been doing that, and when I first started, that's what I wanted to do was to change the way of how Native American art looks, because there's a lot of Native American art shows, such as The Herd, that follow with traditional cultural art, and same style, same everything. And I enter my work there, and a lot of the awards that are given to are like traditional. And so in a way, I want to change that perspective of the way people see Native art, and that it's more than just landscapes or horses and stuff, that it can be these weird figures that are influenced from everything in the world.
Yeah.
And that it can be more than...
Well, after all, you are a Native and an Indigenous person living in 2025.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're not living in an isolated world. We're living in a world that has access to influences from everywhere. So it's suitable that you would be incorporating things from where the whole world that you live in.
And that influence of mine is Fritz Scholder.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a couple books on him, and his work really changed the perspective of how he put Native American people in the time that they were living in. And some of it can be, the older generation can be see it as being taboo, or can be see it as offensive. But it's like real, just because that's what they're living.
It didn't occur to me that, from the perspective of the traditional Native art forms, that these contemporary art forms, people taking liberties with it, might be considered offensive. Mm-hmm. It's never. I mean, I know that because the Indian market has an entire category now that is just contemporary. So for some reason, I guess I assumed that there was a blessing on playing with sort of some of the original styles and features. But I guess if you're a traditionalist, that might be considered offensive, or
I think it depends.
Disruptive.
Depends on the artist of who do practice in traditional Native design work, and when new things, people don't like changes, and we can see that all over. And when one thing sticks, it's there. But when someone tries to change it for them, or for the art world, or world just in a sense, it disrupts how they feel. Like Fritz Scholder, he definitely, him and T.C. Cannon definitely changed the portraits of Native American people in their art, and putting them in traditional regalia and clothing, but in a sense of being in a city and more contemporary places. And so with mine, I'm inspired with that, with just being, I love putting in the Native American imagery, mainly the chiefs. I've always been fascinated with the headdresses and how they look, because they look like warriors. They are warriors, and in my paintings, that's what they are. And they're, in a lot of the paintings, they're seen as heroes to me. They're seen as...
And what is their fight? Who are they warriors for?
I think they're warriors for themselves, and for wherever they are. It's so many things that go on in these paintings that...
So is it more like a warrior for the self, to becoming this, like the interior landscape and...
Yeah, it's, it's being, these are weird places that they are in, and some of them are in like rooms, or like for that one is like I got inspired with the Chateau Marmont, and that's a place that I really want to stay at and make art in that place. And so with that, it's like being in LA, and they're just living their life more.
Do you see yourself staying here in New Mexico, in the land of enchantment?
I would like to move to Santa Fe. You know, there's such a unique art world out there. And I've done a few shows in Santa Fe, and a lot of people are very supportive and they love my work in Santa Fe. And especially LA with doing the Autry. A lot of people love that. But I think 2 places, maybe 3, would be LA, New York, and Seattle. Those are like the top 3 places, but...
Have you visited either New York or Seattle?
Yeah, I've been to New York last year, and, you know, it's such a cool, weird place. I got to visit, like, the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, and seeing that art there. And, you know, the art scene in New York is pretty much where this, like, neo-expressionism and this type of style started from, was New York. But I would try to go for LA just because I'm very inspired with where I go, and LA is an inspirational place to me because it's such a weird place as well. And some of my older pieces as well were inspired from LA. And
well, when I think of the music that you were talking about earlier, I think of New York just sounds like punk rock. So if you were to attribute a kind of music to LA, what sound does LA make for you?
When I think of LA, I think of Black Flag or the Red Hot Chili Peppers, just because those 2 bands did start in LA. You know, their energy, the way they perform, and the way they make music is like the way I make art and the way I put color on. It's so many layers, and it's so complex that it matches with that music that starts from it. And when I think of New York, it's more punk and like jazz music.
And jazz, for sure, jazz.
That's been a daily playlist of mine when I created a few of these pieces was jazz music, John Coltrane, and I put it on shuffle and it just varies through it, and then it just goes on to the painting.
That's awesome. Well, I can't wait to see where you go next with everything. And I'm so glad we finally got to do this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll end it there. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on ArtStorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.